Charles Oliveira versus Rafael Fiziev has been canceled for UFC Rio, guys. That was supposed to be the main event. I'm sure y'all have heard already, but Rafael Fiziev has pulled out of his main event spot due to an injury, okay? So this is what we're doing today. I'm going to give you 5 possible replacements for Rafael Fiziev because Charles Oliveira is saying that he wants to stay on the Brazil card. He just needs a new opponent, guys. So this is a massive opportunity for the UFC to honestly make this event even better. So let's go ahead and get into it, starting off with option number 1, guys. Honestly, this all depends on the health of Dan Hooker. We know Dan Hooker suffered a hand injury way back in the build-up to UFC 313 against Justin Gaethje. I don't know if he's healthy because he's been, first of all, Dan Hooker and the UFC seem to be not getting along because something happened where Dan Hooker was supposed to show up for some meet and greet. He didn't show up, so the UFC got mad at him, rightfully so, and Dan Hooker's basically saying, I'm going to return whenever I want. That you don't play that game with the UFC. However, Dan Hooker's made it clear in the past that he wants to fight Charles Oliveira, but he's been calling him out for November in Madison Square Garden. So here's the thing with Dan Hooker. First of all, if you can fight in November, I think it might be pushing it, but you can probably fight 1 month later. I know this is short notice, but Dan Hooker, this is a great opportunity for you. You've been wanting to fight Charles Oliveira for years. You've been calling him out. Y'all been talking trash to each other. This is a massive opportunity because if you step in, not only are you back on the good side for the UFC, but if you beat Charles Oliveira, like, are we talking about a Dan Hooker title fight in 2026? That could be a real possibility. Obviously, nobody wants to see Dan Hooker versus Ilia Topuria because we know how that goes, but this is a great opportunity. Even if you step in and lose to Charles, your stock does not drop whatsoever. You're still potentially going to fight for the BMF title in your next fight. So I think this fight makes all the sense in the world. Obviously, it comes down to Dan Hooker's health. If he can make it for November, give him some extra money to take it on short notice and go to Brazil and fight Charles in his hometown. But I think Dan Hooker versus Do Bronx would be a banger fight, guys. The loser has to stop bleaching his hair, and he's got to get his tattoos removed because they're basically copy and paste of each other. But let's go ahead and move on, guys. Yes, you knew it was coming. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Gamrot glazer, all right? Charles Oliveira versus cousin Gamrot honestly might make the most sense out of every single fight on here, guys. Yes, we could be living in a world where our boy, our cousin Gamrot, goes out there and beats Charles Oliveira, guys. I'm just saying, guys, we are living in a world where that is a possibility. Mateusz Gamrot, a.k.a. cousin Gamrot, is ranked number 8 in the lightweight division. He's 4-1 in his last 5, really 5-0 in his last 5 because we all know he beat Dan Hooker. He got robbed. But anyway, Gamrot versus Oliveira makes sense because Gamrot, like I said, is number 8. He's riding a little win streak. He should be riding a 5-fight win streak. But like I said, Gamrot versus Charles makes a lot of sense because they were willing to do Charles versus Fiziev. Now, I know it was fluky. I know it was an injury, but Gamrot is a guy who has a win over Rafael Fiziev. But not only that, guys, I'm telling you, Gamrot, he just fought a month or 2 ago. He's calling out on Twitter. He says that he wants to fight Charles. He said, UFC, put me in the spotlight. And this is the thing, guys. Gamrot gets disrespected by the UFC. In his last fight, he fought Ludovic Klein, who's unranked. I don't know why that fight even got booked. If he would have beat Dan Hooker, and he did beat Dan Hooker, but if the judges would have gave him his rightful victory, we would be talking about Gamrot potentially in a number 1 contenders fight right now, if that didn't happen already. So here's your chance. Give cousin Gamrot his chance, guys. First of all, this is a very, very entertaining fight. If you liked Gamrot versus Tsarukyan, you're going to like Oliveira versus Gamrot, a 5-round banger, bro. In Brazil, it makes sense rankings-wise. It's a lesser name than even Rafael Fiziev, maybe. But if you want Charles to win, if you think Gamrot's trash like the way the UFC treats him, then this should be an easy fight for Charles, man. This should be an easy win for Charles to get in front of his Brazilian crowd, right? You know, and bounce back and be looking for the title picture again. This is not an easy fight. I would probably pick Charles. However, I'm just going to tell you this right now. This would be a very, very, very competitive fight. But anyway, guys, let's move on to option number 3. This one is less likely than the first two, I believe. But I think it still makes sense, man. Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan, the rematch. These two, we all know, fought at UFC 300 in a 3-round fight. Imagine if that was a 5-rounder. People say that if it was a 5-rounder, Charles would have won. Maybe that's the case. We don't know. Let's settle it right here, right now. Arman Tsarukyan looking for his title shot, right? People saying he hasn't earned it. He's been inactive since the Charles fight. What do you do with him? Ilia Topuria is not giving him the title shot. The UFC said they're not giving him the title shot. He needs to earn it and win one more after pulling out against Islam. So how do you make him earn it? How do you make Arman earn your trust? You have him go to Brazil on short notice and make weight and fight Charles Oliveira. I know he already did it, but let's see him do it again in a 5-round fight. If you beat Charles Oliveira and save the UFC and save the event in Brazil, we will let you fight Ilia Topuria, guys. Yes, we, the UFC president, we will let you fight Ilia. Now, would Arman Tsarukyan take this fight if it was offered? Maybe so, bro. I don't know, though. I don't know if he's willing to cut weight, guys. The event's 3 weeks away. He's been training because he just submitted Benson Henderson in some grappling event, but I don't know, man. If you want a true #1 contender for Ilia Topuria, and he's going to fight early next year, you get the ball rolling in the lightweight division. You do Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan in the rematch, okay? If Charles Oliveira ends up beating Arman Tsarukyan, which is very likely, by the way, very possible, I'm not going to say likely, then you did yourself a favor. The UFC obviously doesn't like this guy. They obviously do not like Arman Tsarukyan. So if Charles beats him right here, you don't have to worry about an Arman title shot in the future because Charles will basically eliminate him from title picture. That's how the UFC is going to see it. On the other hand, if Arman Tsarukyan beats Charles Oliveira for a second time, he will be fighting Ilia Topuria in his next fight. But let's go ahead and move on to option number 4. This one is very, very similar to this one, okay? Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje, the rematch. Man, the rematch, years in the making. One of my favorite fights of all time, even though it only lasted 1 round. But Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. Here's the thing. Gaethje's in a similar situation to Arman Tsarukyan in the sense that he didn't pull out and ruin an event, but he also has not earned himself a title fight in the lightweight division. So, how do you do that? Same thing with Arman Tsarukyan. How do you do that? You get on the UFC's good side once again because Gaethje's also threatening retirement if he doesn't get a title fight. But he's also said that he would be willing to fight somebody that has previously beat him. Something mentally it doesn't sit right with Justin Gaethje to have somebody like Charles Oliveira just have a win over him. He said he wants to get that back. How do you do that? You step in on short notice, go into Charles Oliveira's backyard, and you beat him. I know that is a very, very tall task. I would pick Charles to win this fight. But Gaethje, listen, I know you're on the back end of your career, and I mean back end of your career. But this is a massive spot. This is a really massive spot for Gaethje. Is this one likely? No, it's not very likely. Gaethje's sitting out like a little baby. I'm going to be real. I'm just being real. But if the UFC calls you and has you and asks you to come fight Charles Oliveira in 3 weeks and guarantees you a title fight if you win, what more do you need? You've been turning down fights with Paddy Pimblett because you feel like he doesn't deserve it. But what about Charles? A former champion, a guy who has a victory over you, a guy who just fought for the title in his last fight. Why don't you accept that fight? I think this makes sense. Not only is this a banger fight, not only is this one of the best fight night headliners you could ever ask for, this is a win-win. Same with Arman Tsarukyan, if Charles beats Justin Gaethje, Gaethje might even retire, but he's out of the title picture. And if Gaethje beats Charles, Gaethje's fighting Ilia Topuria in his next fight, which seems like the route the UFC want to go anyway. So I know a lot of these are rematches, but I mean, Charles Oliveira's fought almost everybody in the division. I don't want to see Charles versus Benoit Saint Denis. There were rumors of that. There were rumors of BSD versus Charles Oliveira. They got shut down because BSD himself said he has too much respect for Charles. He doesn't want to fight him. I didn't really want to see that fight, but it's not the worst fight in the world. But we got one more option. And this last option, I feel, is more likely than Gaethje or Arman. But I really don't care to see it, bro. And this is what it is. Charles Oliveira versus Renato Moicano. Now, talk about a guy who does not deserve this spot right here. Moicano, I understand he's a great fighter, but he's also on a 2-fight losing streak. Now, Charles Oliveira is not on this crazy win streak either, but Moicano just lost to Dariush. So, why would we reward him and put him in a main event spot against a guy like Dubronx? I just don't think it makes sense. However, Money Moicano is calling for this on Twitter. He's saying he wants to fight Charles Oliveira in Brazil. He even made a whole YouTube rant about it. I didn't watch it, but apparently he made a whole video explaining how the UFC should book him versus Charles. It would be an interesting stylistic matchup, but I don't want to see it, guys. I don't want to see it. I don't know if that's just me. I understand it makes sense for the Brazilian crowd because it's a Brazilian versus another Brazilian. I just don't care to see this fight, man. I would much rather see Gaethje. I would much rather see Arman Tsarukyan. I would much rather even see Gamrot, and definitely rather see Dan Hooker. But these are the possibilities, man. I'm really, really hoping the UFC does not just book Charles Oliveira versus some nobody. I'm not going to be surprised if that happens, if we see some unranked contender fighting Charles, because at that point, if Charles ends up losing, everybody's going to cry. And we don't want to see that, man, because if Charles Oliveira does lose in Brazil, it's very likely, in my opinion, that he's going to retire. So let's give him a winnable fight like a Dan Hooker, especially if the UFC doesn't like him right now. You eliminate Dan Hooker from any title fights. If he beats Gamrot, the UFC doesn't like Gamrot either. They made that very clear based on his matchmaking. It's a win-win. Same thing with Arman Tsarukyan. The UFC doesn't like him. I don't know what the UFC's problem is. They act like they don't pick favorites, but they definitely do. This is a win-win. If you eliminate Arman Tsarukyan from the title picture, there you go. If Arman Tsarukyan wins, there you go. You have a new number one contender. He should be the number one contender anyway, but Justin Gaethje, threatening retirement. If he loses, you have his retirement. It's already here. If he wins, Justin Gaethje is your new number one contender going to be fighting Ilia Topuria next year. It makes sense to me. And finally, for Money Moicano, this one does not make sense rankings-wise. It doesn't really make sense at all, other than to please the Brazilian crowd. Because if we're being honest, if Moicano does fluke a win over Charles, like, what do you do with him? You don't throw him in a title fight. He's got to win like 3 more to earn his shot at the title. He already had an undeserving title fight, got submitted in the first round. But if you add a win to Charles Oliveira, like, if he adds a win like Charles on his resume, what do you do with him next? I don't know, man, but these are my options, my personal options for who should step in and fight Charles Oliveira. If I had to pick, I would pick Justin Gaethje. I think this is a great spot for Gaethje to get that win back from Charles. I don't think it's likely, but it would give us a number one contender if Gaethje were to win. Obviously, I would love to see this one. I would be torn if Gamrot won, or I'd be torn if Gamrot fought because, he's going to win. He has plot armor. He's undefeated in the UFC. Real ones know. And Dan Hooker versus Oliveira, all of these guys, I think every single one of these outside of Moicano is an upgrade to what the original main event was. But anyway, guys, these are just my opinions. Hopefully, we will have an answer in the next few days. I'm sure maybe even before that. But these are my opinions. I would love to see Hooker. I would love to see Gaethje. I would love to see Arman. I'd love to see Gamrot, just not Moicano. But anyway, guys, go ahead and hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed. Comment something for the algorithm. Hit the subscribe button, guys. I appreciate y'all for tuning in, and we out.